Frozen. Baby Bigfoots in the cave. The secret that shocked everyone. He almost stepped on them. Two small bodies half buried in snow so still, he thought they were dead. But then one of them breathed. A tiny cloud of frost slipped from its mouth. And in that moment, the storm outside went silent. Elmer Crow froze where he stood. 70 winters behind him, and yet he'd never felt the mountain look back at him like this. He'd hunted wolves, seen bears up close. But this was different. This was sacred. He knelt beside the bodies. His hand trembled as he brushed away the ice. Soft fur pale gray under the torchlight. Fingers, 5 of them small, cold, human-like. He felt a heartbeat. Weak, but there. 2 infants. Not human. Not beast. The kind of thing men spend lifetimes chasing with cameras and guns, and he had found them dying in the dark. His breath hitched. He looked around the cave, nothing but blue walls and dripping ice. No mother. No sound. Just that faint, broken breathing. He could walk away now. Say nothing. Pretend he never saw this. But he remembered a different winter, the one where his own boy didn't make it home. And something cracked inside him. He took off his coat, wrapped them both, and pulled them close to the fire. They were light as air. Their bodies barely warmed under his touch. He whispered, "Don't you dare give up on me now." One of them stirred a weak whimper so soft it barely reached his ear. Then the other shifted, pressing closer as if the sound of a heartbeat meant safety. Elmer's eyes burned. In the flicker of the fire, he saw his son's face for a split second, then only the reflection of 2 tiny creatures clinging to life. Outside, thunder rolled through the peaks. Something big moved beyond the cave's mouth, a shadow, a rumble, the sound of the forest holding its breath. He glanced at the entrance, then back at them. "What kind of father leaves his children out here?" he muttered. But even as he said it, he knew the answer. Only one forced to choose between saving them or dying with them. A gust of wind pushed snow into the firelight. The shadows danced like ghosts across the walls. Elmer looked down again. The baby's breathing steadied their chests, rising in time with his own. He exhaled, voice cracking. "If this is the last thing I ever do, I'll make sure you see another sunrise." He didn't know that sunrise would bring more than light. It would bring something colossal. Something watching, listening, and remembering the man who dared to save what others would fear. Before we go deeper into that cave, take a second. Tell me in the comments, if you were him alone in the storm, would you have done the same? Because what happens next isn't just a story about monsters. It's about mercy. And the night mercy met legend. Part 1. The Fire and the Promise. The storm kept clawing at the cave mouth, howling like a wounded beast that couldn't find its kill. Inside, the old man fought with his hands shaking, trying to coax flame from damp wood. Every spark died against the cold air, until finally one caught. It flared, then grew, and the cave glowed gold for the first time in years. 2 tiny shapes lay by the fire, their fur glistening like wet ash. Steam rose from them as the ice melted off. Elmer leaned close, listening. Breaths, faint, uneven, but breaths. He pressed his palm to one chest. Under the fur, a heart fluttered weakly, like a bird trapped under snow. He whispered, "You're still here, little one. Stay with me." He reached into his pack, found a scrap of jerky boiled snow in a dented tin cup, and held a few drops to the creature's lips. Nothing. Then a tremor, a tiny tongue, a weak swallow. Elmer laughed short and shaky. "Good. That's good." He shifted closer, wrapping his coat tighter around them both. The smell of smoke filled the air, sweet pine and singed fur. It reminded him of the cabin long gone, of nights when his boy would fall asleep by the fire while he told stories about the things that walked these mountains. He remembered the boy's wide eyes. "How do you know they're real, Pa?" And Elmer had said, "Because something keeps the forest quiet at night, son. And it ain't just the wind." Now in this cave, he could almost feel that something watching again. The hair on his neck lifted. Outside, the wind changed tone, no longer wild but searching. He turned his head toward the dark corridor deeper in the ice. Nothing but silence. But the kind of silence that breathes back. He whispered, "I mean no harm." The words came out like smoke, fragile human. He looked down again. One of the infants had gripped his finger. Its hand was warm now. Tiny claws curled around the roughness of his skin. The other made a soft noise, almost like a sigh. Elmer felt something twist in his chest. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. He moved closer to the fire, his knees cracking, his joints aching. The flames threw shifting light across the walls, patterns that looked almost like faces watching ancestors carved in ice. He spoke again, not knowing who he was talking to, God, the mountain, or the ghosts of the forest. "If you're out there, if these belong to you, I'm only keeping them alive until you come." Then he added, almost whispering to himself, "Please come." The fire snapped, and the echo of that sound stretched deep into the tunnel beyond him like something answering. He stared into the dark, heart pounding. The warmth behind him, the tiny lives he'd just rescued, and the unknown ahead, heavy as a held breath. He loaded another log into the fire, its crackle masking the faint sound of dripping water and something else. A rhythm. Slow. Distant. Too heavy to be the wind. He closed his eyes, pressed a hand against his chest, and whispered, "Not yet. Not tonight." Outside, lightning flashed somewhere far beyond the snowfields, and for an instant the whole cave shimmered like glass. Elmer leaned back against the rock, his shadow large and trembling on the wall. The fire hissed softly. The little creatures slept safe for now. He let out a long breath. Maybe saving them wouldn't save him. Maybe it would damn him. But either way, he'd already made the choice. He would stay. Sometimes mercy doesn't wait for the brave, it chooses the broken who stay behind. Part 2. The Legends in the Dark. The night stretched on like a wound that wouldn't close. Outside, the storm had quieted, but inside the cave, silence had teeth. Every crack of melting ice sounded like a whisper too close. Elmer sat with his back to the fire rifle across his knees, watching the tunnel that wound deeper into the mountain. The little ones slept beside him, chests rising and falling beneath the folds of his coat. He told himself he'd rest just a moment, but the mountain had other plans. From somewhere beyond the reach of firelight came a sound he hadn't heard in 50 years. A deep, resonant thump that made the ground tremble under him. He froze. It came again. Slow, heavy, deliberate. His pulse hammered. He knew that rhythm. He'd heard it once before, long ago, when he was young, camped in these same peaks with his son, back when stories were only stories. He closed his eyes, and memory flooded back. That night, the one he'd buried deep, a howl had echoed across the valley. Not wolf, not bear. It was lower, older, a sound that made the horses rear and the fire die without wind. He'd seen a shape then, just a silhouette against the snow, walking upright, taller than any man, and carrying something in its arms. Something small, something it held like it mattered. He'd never told his son what he saw. He'd laughed it off, called it fog fatigue, imagination. But now, in this cave, with 2 living proofs at his feet, there was no laughing left in him. He gripped his rifle tighter. The metal was ice against his skin. He didn't want to shoot, not yet, but fear made fools of even the faithful. The sound came closer. Thump. A pause. Thump. Elmer leaned forward, breath shallow. The firelight flickered, throwing his own shadow across the walls. For a moment, it looked like something standing behind him. He spun, heart jumping into his throat. Nothing. Just ice. Then, a new sound. Soft, rhythmic. Like knuckles tapping wood knock. 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 He whispered, "No. No. Not now." But the sound answered him, 3 knocks, then 2, then silence. The old miners had a name for that. They called it the warning before the watcher, when the forest goes still and the mountain knocks back. Elmer turned to the children. They were awake now, eyes open wide, shining in the firelight. They weren't afraid. They were listening, responding. One of them lifted a tiny hand and knocked back on the ground 3 times. Elmer's blood turned cold. He started, but it was too late. From deep within the cave, a sound answered. Low, long, not a knock, this time a call. The ice shuddered. Snow fell from the ceiling in quiet flurries. The fire dimmed as if the air itself had thickened. Elmer's instincts screamed at him to run, but the two creatures were looking up at him, trusting calm, their small fingers still clutching his coat. He couldn't move. He whispered to himself, "This is what the old stories meant." He remembered the voices of the trappers, their faces flickering in campfire light. "They don't kill for sport," one had said. "They punish the cruel, and they keep their own hidden." "You'll never find one alive," another replied, "unless they want you to." The mountain had rules, and tonight he had broken one. He'd stepped into a secret he wasn't meant to see. The thumping grew louder now, rhythmic, steady, closer. Elmer lifted the rifle halfway. The fire flared once, revealing long shadows shifting beyond the tunnel. A deep breath not his filled the air. Slow, heavy. He could smell it, earth musk pine and something else, wet fur mixed with iron. He whispered, "Lord, give me courage." The small one whimpered, and Elmer instinctively reached to soothe it. Its tiny hand pressed against his chest, and in that moment he swore he heard a second heartbeat that wasn't his own. He looked up and the tunnel breathed out fog, warm, white, alive. Something was there, watching, waiting. Elmer's voice cracked. "If you're here for them, take me instead." Silence. Then just at the edge of light, a shadow moved, vast, slow, graceful as snowfall. The children stirred again. One reached toward the dark and made a soft sound, half cry, half song. The shadow stopped, and the mountain held its breath. When fear and faith meet in the same breath, that's when legends decide if you live or not. Part 3. The Guardian of the Cave. The air itself seemed to pause. No more dripping water, no more wind, just the sound of his own pulse pounding like a drum against the cold stone. Elmer's torch flickered once, twice, then steadied, and in that trembling light the shadow moved again. A shape unfolded from the dark, taller than any man, broad as the mouth of the tunnel itself. Steam rose from its shoulders. Its breath fogged the air in heavy clouds. One step forward, and the mountain groaned under its weight. Elmer couldn't move. The rifle in his hands felt useless, small, foolish, almost offensive in the presence of something this old. The creature's eyes caught the firelight. Amber, deep, alive. Not the eyes of a beast, but of something that knew. For a moment, it didn't look at Elmer. It looked at the fire, then at the two small bodies beside him. Its chest rose and fell, once a sound deep as thunder rolling through earth. The babies stirred soft noises, breaking the stillness. One reached a hand toward the massive shadow. The creature froze, then took one more step forward. Elmer's voice cracked into the silence. "I'm not here to hurt them." He barely recognized his own tone, half prayer, half surrender. The giant exhaled, and that breath blew through the cave, flickering the fire, but not extinguishing it. The air smelled of pine rain and something metallic, not blood, but the sharpness of mountain stone. It crouched. And now Elmer saw the way the fur clung to its body, soaked and matted with ice, the scars across its arm, the way its hand, enormous yet careful, hovered inches above the sleeping young. The torchlight revealed its face, heavy brow, broad jaw, but eyes. Eyes filled with a sorrow so human it made Elmer's chest ache. He lowered his rifle. Very slowly he extended his hand, palm open, fingers trembling. "I kept them warm," he whispered. That's all. The Bigfoot's gaze met his, and in that gaze was no rage, no hunger. Only understanding. Only the same instinct that had brought Elmer to his knees hours ago to protect no matter the cost. The creature made a sound, a low hum that vibrated through the walls, a tone that wasn't language yet somehow spoke. The little ones responded, their tiny heads turning soft coos echoing back. It was a reunion without words. The kind of sound that belongs to the oldest stories on Earth. Elmer felt tears burn behind his eyes. He whispered, "They're yours." His throat closed. I reckon they always were. The Bigfoot moved closer. It reached one massive hand toward him, slow, deliberate, and placed it against his shoulder. The weight was gentle, but the meaning heavy enough to shake him to his bones. Elmer flinched, not from fear, but from the power of what he felt: gratitude, forgiveness, a kind of peace that didn't need words. The creature looked at him one last time, and Elmer could have sworn he heard something in its eyes say, "Thank you." Then it gathered the two infants against its chest. They fit there perfectly, their small bodies disappearing into the warmth of its fur. The torchlight shimmered as the giant rose to its full height. It turned toward the tunnel, but before leaving it reached down, picked up a flat stone, and drew 3 long, clawed lines across its surface. Then it set the stone beside Elmer. The marks glowed faintly in the fire's reflection, raw, deliberate, sacred. A promise, a warning, a signature. Elmer didn't speak. He only bowed his head because somehow, deep down, he knew he was standing in a church not built by men. The creature moved back into the darkness, its steps echoing low and rhythmic, like the slow heartbeat of the mountain itself. The sound faded, and once again the cave belonged to silence. Elmer sat alone by the dying fire, the stone beside him still warm. He reached out, traced the claw marks with his fingertips, and whispered, "I won't tell." Outside, the wind picked up again, but this time it wasn't angry. It was soft, almost reverent, as if the storm itself bowed its head before the secret now kept within the ice. Elmer stayed awake until dawn. Every few minutes he thought he heard movement in the trees outside, a distant rustle, a low echo, the faint knock of wood on wood. Maybe it was the creature watching one last time. Maybe it was the forest remembering him. When the fire burned out, he let it. He didn't need light to believe anymore. There are moments when the world stops being divided between man and monster, when all that's left is a heartbeat, shared in silence. Part 4. The Morning of the Vow. When Elmer opened his eyes, the fire had burned to ash. A thin thread of smoke curled toward the ceiling, then vanished into pale morning light spilling through the cave mouth. He sat up slowly. The cold had returned, sharp, clean, and almost kind. For a moment, he thought the night had been a dream. But then he saw it. The stone. 3 clawed lines carved deep, still, glistening as though the frost itself refused to cover them. And beside it a single dark hair, long, coarse, heavy with dew. He reached for it, rolled it between his fingers. It shimmered in the sun like a strand of silver. Real. He turned toward the corner where the little ones had lain. Nothing. Just a hollow in the snow, 2 small indents where warmth had once been. He smiled, not in sadness, but in a kind of quiet reverence. "They made it," he whispered. He stood and walked toward the cave's mouth. Outside, the world had transformed. The storm had washed everything clean. The mountains stood like sleeping giants under a sky the color of ash and gold. Sunlight hit the snow in waves, turning it into a sea of tiny diamonds. And there, leading away from the cave, a trail of footprints, large ones, deep and certain. And beside them 2 smaller sets, crooked, learning, alive. Elmer followed them a few steps, out his breath, a ghost in the cold air. The prince moved toward the tree line where morning fog still clung to the pines. He stopped at the last one, a single impression pressed deeper than the rest, as if the creature had paused to look back. He knelt, pressed his gloved hand beside it. It dwarfed his palm completely. Yet somehow it didn't feel threatening. It felt like a farewell. He noticed something then tucked into the snow, half hidden. A small round stone, smooth as river glass, marked with the same 3 lines as the first. But across them, a 4th line cut sideways like a cross. He lifted it, and for the first time in years, his eyes filled. Not from grief, but from the weight of being seen. He whispered, "You came back." The wind stirred through the trees, gentle, rhythmic, 2 short, 1 long, the same pattern the little ones had knocked in the night. He smiled through the tears. "Yeah," he said softly, "I hear you." He turned back to the cave, looked once more at the dying embers. For years he had lived in silence, haunted by the sound of what he'd lost. But today the silence didn't hurt. It hummed. It breathed. It remembered. He tucked the stone into his pocket, the hair into his coat, and began the long walk down the ridge. His knees ached, his breath fogged in steady bursts, but there was a warmth in his chest that no winter could take. Halfway down the slope, he looked back one last time. The cave was just a dark mouth in a white world, yet somehow it glowed faintly, softly, as if fire still burned within. He tipped his hat. "Thank you for letting me see." The wind answered low and kind, and for the first time in a lifetime he felt the mountain wasn't alone, and neither was he. Sometimes miracles don't come to save us. They come to remind us that we were never forgotten. The secret kept in ice. Years later, when a team of hikers found the old man's cabin, it was half buried in snow. Inside, silence and a faint smell of pine smoke that never seemed to fade. On the table sat a leather-bound journal, its pages' yellowed edges curled from years of cold and firelight. They opened it to the last entry. The handwriting trembled, but the words were steady. They were real. They loved their young. They spared a foolish old man who thought he understood the mountain. I don't anymore. I just listen. Beside the journal lay 2 stones, one marked with the 3 clawed lines, the other crossed through with that single mark of return. And under them a long coarse hair, silver at the ends, resting like a seal between 2 worlds. The hikers said the cabin felt peaceful, not abandoned, watched over, as if whoever had lived there was still keeping his promise. Outside the cabin window, fresh snow had fallen, and just beyond the fence line, they found tracks. 3 deep, massive footprints, followed by 2 smaller ones side by side, headed back toward the ridge. The wind moved through the trees again, and someone swore they heard it, a rhythm soft as breath, 2 short, 1 long. The mountain was still listening. The vow was still alive. Some secrets aren't meant to be broken. They're meant to be carried in silence and kindness, in the hearts of those who choose compassion over fear. And if you're listening now somewhere far from that frozen ridge, maybe you were meant to hear this too, a reminder that mercy leaves footprints and that not every legend is built from lies. Before you go, take a moment to breathe and tell me where you're watching from. Would you have done what he did? Would you have stayed? If this story touched you, leave your city in the comments. Rate it from 0 to 10 and share it with someone who still believes that kindness survives even in the coldest places. Because maybe, just maybe, the mountain remembers those who do.